It's my honor today to present a great author. She wrote God's Brothel. Her name is Andrea Moore Emmett. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you.
Give us a little rundown on your book.
My book, God's Brothel, was published in 2004. It was written quite a number of years before. It came out and was the first book that actually talked about the trafficking of girls, the slavery of women, the discarding of young boys in polygamy. Mormon fundamentalists and Christian fundamentalist polygamy throughout the United States and into Canada and Mexico. So that book was written to help Tapestry Against Polygamy also. I gave half of all the proceeds to Tapestry Against Polygamy, who in those days in Salt Lake was fighting polygamy and the abuses that go on. They were making changes with legislative acts for the marriage age of girls to be changed, because at that time in Utah, girls could be married to older men at the age of 13. So that was one of the accomplishments that they did at that time. Hopefully my book has made some changes and helped women and children, added a voice to the dialogue that's going on and continues to go on today about polygamy in the United States and our neighboring countries. Actually, there's women representing about, I think, 13 different cults, polygamous cults in my book, including some of the independent families. There were women from Christian groups as well as from the polygamous Mormon fundamentalist groups.
Your book clearly pointed out that the method of operation, the grooming of the girls, using religion to enslave people, was a common denominator in all of them.
Exactly. And I think that the model that we're looking at for polygamous relationships has absolutely nothing to do with the domestic violence model that we're used to seeing. You have to rewrite all the rules when you're talking about polygamy. I think what we're looking at with the polygamous model is a master-slave model. And that's the way I approach it, because these women have to start over to be actualized human beings.
I'm really glad you pointed that out. A lot of people are really misunderstanding. They think that they can go and pick these women up and just set them someplace else if they can and they'll be free. They don't realize that they are still in a prison of the mind, that they are controlled through what they have been indoctrinated into. Explain that.
I think just to encapsulate that message is done very well by this one particular woman in my book, Laura Chapman, who said, imagine taking a child from a third world country, picking them up and setting them down in New York City and saying, here, go live your life. That kind of tells you how completely lost they are in the rest of the world. But it goes further with the slavery model in that these women have never been able to make any choices, never been able to self-actualize. They have lost so much, including as they were growing up, because they weren't allowed to grow up. They have never gone through the typical life stages as normal children have to go through, as all children have to go through, as all human beings have to go through. The stage of being an adolescent and a young person, and I mean, even childhood is gone in polygamy. There's no childhood. So they haven't had these stages of life, and they're very socially and life stage retarded in a way. And they're kept human beings. They're meant to be worker bees, and they have no freedom. They have no freedom for even to think. So that is basically where you start with a slave that's just been shackled in every kind of way.
They have to have blind obedience. Is that not true?
Blind obedience in every single way. The idea of having choices is non-existent, really. I mean, they are told in a religious kind of context that they have free agency, that God has given them free agency to make choices. But they don't actually have choices, and there's a constant fear and shaming that goes on. The fear that they will have eternal damnation, and the shame that if they have any kind of even thought that leads them in another direction, that's allowing the evil into their life. Including you can't even have a frowny face. You have to constantly be sweet and show that you're so happy and say that you're so happy. And if you're not happy, it's something wrong with you, not with your environment. So it's this reality that doesn't exist that they have to pretend exists. The idea of even having a choice, like for instance a woman in my book who said that after being out for years and someone at work asked her, let's go get ice cream, what's your favorite ice cream? And she didn't even know. She had no idea, because she said, I was always told what I would like and what I wouldn't like. So just simple things. Imagine if you can't even think for yourself on the simplest of things, what it would be like to try to make a choice or a decision or think for yourself on something that was affecting your life. And of course they can't make a choice on what's affecting their life, because they're told by the prophet, this is who you're going to marry, these are the kids you're going to have, if you're going to have any at all, which they do. They all have to have children. You can't have this, you can't do that, you have to live here, you have to do this. They do not know what choices and how to even think for themselves. So making any kind of decision is next to impossible. But then again, it's your eternal damnation.
In polygamy, we were taught that the women and the children belong to the men for time and all eternity, and that they must be obedient. So the sense of belonging and follow blindly is incorporated throughout absolutely all of them, because they don't belong to themselves. Is that not true?
Oh, exactly. They are property. Women and children are property, and men are gods on earth. Like slaves, they're property. They're owned, and no, they don't have any sense of self or self-actualization at all.
Responsibility in polygamy. Will you define that?
Responsibility falls on women to be happy, to make sure that they obediently and blindly follow the Lord and Master, the prophet, and or the husband, who is the God of the home. And men have to have a certain number of wives, and usually that's around 3 wives, but it can vary depending on the whims of the prophet and the religion, the cult, particular group of followers, to 7, 12, even more. And then for the prophet, it can be infinite number of women. But women have to make sure that they do as they're told, marry as they're told, and make sure that the man accumulates his number of wives. It's up to the women to make sure that the children are obedient followers, and but not necessarily the ones that it falls on to punish. But although that does happen, the men are ruthless in their punishment. The men are the ones that get the glory for the perfect little followers, the little obedient children. But women have to make sure that everything runs smooth. Do without food if they have to. Do without all the things they need to run a household of numerous children. The children are just a herd. They're not individual. They don't really have relationships with their parents in these bigger families, because there's just too many. No man can get to know around 200 children individually. And so the responsibility of the children is to obey and to be little workers and do as they're told. The women have to do as they're told. And the men, it's their responsibility to build up the kingdom and their own particular kingdom as well. And, it's difficult to just generalize, because it's different in some of the individual families, and it's different in some of the different groups. But as a rule, that's the climate that they live in.
So the indoctrination is literal enslavement, that they must be obedient and they must build up the kingdom of God. Talking about the kingdom of God, don't these men believe that they're going to have their own planet in eternity and people it with their own seed, and this is the beginning? So heaven and all the consequences of the glory of heaven depend on the unity of the women, and is their responsibility or else. So they're sort of indirectly or maybe directly responsible for the salvation of the family if they don't comply.
Yes, women are directly and indirectly responsible for the family and for these men reaching godhood and having their own planets. And that is an older tenet of the Mormon religion that goes back a long time. As God is, man will become. As man is, God once was. And so that's what they're looking to, is the hereafter, not the now. So you can suffer all you want now. You can sacrifice and live in poverty, and that's what you have to bear for the kingdom, for the hereafter, with a smile on your face.
What are the consequences of leaving polygamy?
Consequences vary, but it's a high cost. Not only do you have women or children who don't know what they're doing out in the world and in the rest of society, they have no clue how to navigate that, but they leave behind everything they've ever known. They leave behind the culture that they've grown up in, that they've come to know. They leave behind family who will now ostracize them completely. Sometimes women have left children behind because the children didn't want to go, or wouldn't go, or couldn't go, or the husband it didn't happen, it couldn't happen. And men have even been known lately to take women to court to get their custody of their kids. Women and children leave behind their whole life. It's being literally refugees within your own country. And they sometimes don't have birth certificates, sometimes don't have driver's license, sometimes haven't got a clue even how to use currency, money. So they're homeless, they have nothing.
The consequences in some of the polygamous cults have been blood atonement, or the threat of blood atonement. And blood atonement is a basic teaching in the cultures that claim or blame Mormonism for their behavior.
Right.
Would you define what that is?
Blood atonement is a threat that's used, and I don't know of it happening recently to anyone, literally happening, but it's always a threat. Blood atonement goes back to early Mormonism, where the price a person pays for apostasy, for telling the secrets of the temple, whatever, the only way to atone is to have your blood spilt. And up until just a decade or two ago, the Mormon Church included it in the temple ceremony, and that was to have your throat slit from ear to ear and yourself cut open from your bowels out. A very, very violent, symbolic kind of ritual in the Mormon temples. But the polygamists, of course, the fundamentalists, took it to be a daily life threat, hanging over anyone's head for leaving, for telling secrets about the group and what goes on and what has happened in their life. So they have this hanging over them all the time, that if they should dare leave or dare talk back or dare do anything to betray the leadership, that they will have to endure blood atonement. So that is a cautionary tail hanging over their head if they leave. And everything is about obedience. Be obedient. Do as you're told. Do as you're told. Constantly, constantly, constantly that drumbeat of obedience.
You are aware that Herbal LeBaron from the cult in Mexico had approximately 30 people blood atoned, as he called it.
Right. When I say I don't think that it's happened recently, I mean like within the last 20 years. But the LeBarons, in not that far away history did, in our recent history did carry out blood atonement killings.
And are you aware that Warren Jeffs threatened to blood atone the girls that tried to escape?
He did, and they all hear it. They all constantly hear that this is something that's going to happen to them. Let me just say it hasn't happened in the last 20 years.
The teaching, however, remains as a teaching justified by God to save a woman's soul, is it not, throughout these polygamous cults?
It is. It is throughout all these polygamous cults.
So the consequences of leaving is the loss of one's salvation, to be destroyed in the flesh, which they may or may not be, in blood atonement or some other way, but God justifies that if you leave. Is that not correct?
Exactly. Whoever carries it out has done God's will, and these women have that constantly hanging over their shoulder. And they do live with that fear, and they are looking over their shoulder for a very, very long time, thinking it can happen at any time.
And getting the children in the cults that are polygamous, the children belong to the men, just like the woman does. So getting the children out is not very common for those who escape.
It's not common. No, women have left children behind many times. Many times.
Very, very difficult, heartbreaking choices.
Yes, very difficult. That's why there aren't that many women who ever leave.
When they do leave, I don't believe the public at large really understands that they need more than just to be left out. They need to be deprogrammed from cult training.
I believe that they need so many services. It's an overwhelming task to try to become part of the regular, normal living and flow of life, and to leave the doctrines and the threats behind and to start your life over. It's monumental. They need therapy. They need therapy from somebody who understands the kind of cult life that they've lived. There's a lot of trauma in their life. They've lived with a lot of abuse. There's just basic life skills that they need to learn, from the simplest to some of the more complicated. And there's a lot of fear just going to the store, just going to doing regular, normal, mundane things that everybody takes for granted. There's a lot of fear for these women, just being around other people who are not like the cult that they came from. It's very fearful. It takes a very long time.
It's also fearful because they've been taught that people from the outside world are going to destroy them, and they're evil and they're wicked. So they believe they're God's chosen people, and the people on the outside are evil. Right. Explain the psychological effects that has on somebody trying to step into another culture.
Well, they've been isolated, and they've been isolated for a reason, because part of the cult enslavement is to isolate and deprive people and get them where they're just like they only can identify to their captors. It's the Stockholm Syndrome. What women need, even where they have children with them or they're alone, after they leave, they have, you have to remember that they haven't gone through the many life stages and haven't developed parts of their personality or their sense of self. They have a learned dependency because they've been told what to do forever. They have this obedient attitude. They're frightened beyond compare of what's out there, of other people, of going places, they think that they're going to be dragged down into the most vile of circumstances. That one woman even told me going to the supermarket was traumatic for her because she'd always been told that the barcode on products was the mark of the beast. So even shopping for groceries was terrifying. The women that don't even know how to use currency, they don't know what they're doing. So those life skills are very important, but psychologically and developmentally, they lag so far behind. There's depression, horrible depression. And of course, yes?
Define the beast.
Oh, I'm sorry. The mark of the beast, well, that is Satan, of course. And Satan influences so many things and so many people, and that influence is everywhere except in the arms of the cult. So it's very, very frightening, and they start having all these thought-stopping things when they're thinking they're okay. There's the thought-stopping little cliches that hit them, and then they think, did I really think that, or was that something they said I would think? And so they question their own reality, they question themselves, their own thought process. It's very confusing, it's very traumatic. So they also, many of them struggle with, with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because of the abuse that they've endured and the abuse that they have been witnessing. And so there's just multiple things that have to be addressed. They need psychiatric care, they need therapy, talk therapy, they need basic life skills, they need to unlearn their dependency. It's overwhelming, and a typical domestic violence shelter isn't going to cut it. A typical house for people to start learning how to get on their feet isn't going to cut it. These are specific needs that need to be addressed.
You mentioned they start to question their reality or their thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Is it not part of the cultural upbringing that they should deny their reality? And I'm going to point that out. When they have fear, anger, jealousy, they must deny it, because any negative feeling is wrong and some sort of a personality defect. We see that on the alleged reality show Sister Wives.
Mm-hmm.
The women say, well, if I get over my jealousy, I'll be a better person.
Mm-hmm.
They were taught from the beginning, that's a perfect example, that their feelings, their honest emotions must be denied to make them better people. Consequently, what happens to a person that keeps denying their reality?
Exactly. They're taught from the time they're little. You shouldn't have these feelings. You shouldn't have these normal human emotions. And in order to be a perfect polygamous wife, you cannot have jealousy. It's to refine yourself to be this better person. Well, jealousy is a normal human reaction. Anger is a normal human reaction. Those are not bad emotions in and of themselves. It's what we do with those that is the problem. We can't act out our anger and assault someone. But to have anger is normal, and you can't shove it down and say, I'm not feeling it, I have to be perfect. And so when these women feel jealousy, because their husband is sleeping with another woman, they're told, you can't have this. And so they're constantly shoving down normal human emotions. And we're not robots. We can't just flip a switch. But that's what they're trying to do. Deny everything you feel, everything you think, and be this robotic, perfect, smiling, happy, everything's wonderful kind of false person. So they get very accustomed to denying what they are, who they are, what they think, and consequently, they don't know what they think anymore. They don't trust their own intuition. They don't trust their own thoughts. They don't trust their own thinking mind. So it's a horrible place for a human being to try to be human.
And when they keep stuffing down their reality, isn't this a primary cause of depression? Because who they are, what they feel, is denied, and pretty soon they don't know who they are and what they feel.
Well, there's a lot of reasons people have depression, including genetic, but that does contribute, and that is something that you would want to look at if you were treating somebody that was feeling depression. You'd want to look at those kinds of things that in their background that led them to the feelings that they're going through.
And the consequences of leaving can be carried out into physical violence in many places according to what the husband wants to do. What I'm driving at is the post-traumatic stress disorder. This is common in polygamy, yes?
Well, post-traumatic stress disorder is very common in polygamy, but I believe that comes from a number of stimuli that they're having to face. There's a lot of child abuse, beatings of children, waterboarding babies, the kinds of punishments, putting children's hands on a hot light bulb. The beatings are really a thing you see a lot. They believe that in fact, one particular group, it's common saying that you can all but kill a child for deliberately disobeying you. So I've heard horrible stories of kids being beaten with blood everywhere, blood on the sheets of the bed they were beaten on. And so those kinds of things are very common. Women are subjected to all kinds of what we'd call typical domestic violence, being thrown down the stairs, beatings. But in polygamy, there's not a concept of violence. There's not a concept of abuse, because men have the right to do whatever it takes to control his property. So if you ask a woman who was beaten badly or thrown down the stairs when she's pregnant, which has been done in court, if that was abuse, she would deny that's abuse. She doesn't even understand the concept of abuse. No, that's his right to control. He has the authority, and that's a good thing that he did that. So they can say that that's not abuse, but internally they have been abused. They have been violated. They've had their rights completely removed, and so there is domestic violence to the degree that yes, they have PTSD, and children who have been beaten, yes, they have PTSD.
A lot of abuse that goes on is psychological and emotional through the threats. We didn't realize that the very act of bringing another woman home and having sex with her was in and of itself abuse. We didn't understand the concepts of abuse of the heart, of the mind, of the intellect. So can you define some of those?
Well, again, going back to not feeling any emotion about your husband sleeping with another woman, or being forced to have sex when you're underage and you have been taught to be modest, or being sexually abused by numbers of men in the group. The kind of emotional and mental torture that these women and children go through has significant repercussions on their psyche and on their mind, and gives them PTSD as well. It is sexual abuse to be subjected to your husband sleeping with another woman in the next bed, in the same room, in the next room with the wall you can hear through it, and told that you can't feel anything but happy that he's sleeping with this other woman. So it's a very big messing of your mind.